Welcome, folks, to Inside the Leader's Mind, where what's in the way becomes the way. I'm your host, David Susan. Thank you so much for being with me today. I'm so excited for our guest, Chris Mele. Chris is the CEO at Software Pricing Partners, that's SPP. He and the team leverage over 4 decades of software and pricing expertise to help companies launch new products and implement pricing as an ongoing, defendable process that maximizes revenue and customer loyalty. A computer science graduate from Miami University, Chris began his career at Ernst & Young, where he helped Bank of America and Netscape launch the first U.S. online banking system, then led digital growth at Rare Medium. He later co-founded a SaaS company that helped the construction industry maximize efficiencies across sales, marketing, and operations. Now he's leaning back into software to shift B2B pricing forward with LevelSetter. That's SPP's pricing management platform. Powered by machine learning and perfected by people, LevelSetter helps B2B software companies simulate, test, and refine their pricing and packaging by eliminating guesswork. The result? Continuous data-driven pricing decisions that improve the bottom line. Chris is an avid tennis player, continual learner, dad, aspiring writer. We're going to have to dig into that real quickly, and still loves to code. Chris, welcome to Inside the Leader's Mind.
Thank you for having me.
All right, tell me about the writing. I know it has nothing to do with what you do, but it's in the bio. I got to ask, what are we talking about there?
So I would say that the phenomenon of both creativity and, as we talk about pricing, creating environments where things emerge, like being able to command your value in the marketplace, are phenomenons that I spend a lot of time on. And for me, creative writing, specifically in the science fiction and fantasy realm, is just something that has sat on the shelf for probably 20 years. I recently had knee surgery from a meniscus tear, and I just got together all of my old writing from college and over the years, and I thought that, this is probably the time to pull it together. So I've been fostering my own creativity in the early mornings. I write for my golden hour, and it's in the fantasy and science fiction realm. So if any of the listeners are into that kind of thing, I'm always on the hunt for early alpha readers that can give me feedback.
So you're doing a book? Let's just do it right here. What's the deadline? When are you going to have it? When are you going to have it?
I thought a year ago, but I just finished Act 1, and so the early readers told me some really positive stuff that I'm excited about. So I'm about halfway through Act 2, and then comes Act 3. So I would anticipate that I'll finish by the end of the year, but I am also going to be submitting to the Writers of the Future. That's L. Ron Hubbard's contest.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so every quarter they pick 3 winners. 3 novel writers or 3 short story writers, and then they pick 3 illustrators. At the end of the year, they take all 12 of you out to San Francisco, I think it is, and you get to meet all of the greats, and they team you up with an illustrator, and then they put you in the anthology. And then there's one winner, which is the Golden Pen Award. And I am not shifting careers. This is just a hobby and a love that I've discovered.
You might end up being the next J.K. Rowling.
You never know.
So I've been doing this a long time. I mean, working, talking, unbelievable the people I've met where they have this little side thing and all of a sudden it takes off and you never know. So I'm always fascinated by people because this is inside the leader's mind. And I think it gives insight into human beings. So that's why we're here. So cool. Keep me posted. Keep us posted.
Yeah, I tried playing guitar. I tried some other things to kind of get the creative juices flowing. If you can imagine dealing with pricing all day, you need something that's kind of like the antithesis of that. So when you get into that world, I find it's a nice way to start the day to get you thinking differently.
Love it. I love it. Yeah, and the creativity helps running a business too. So in fact, you've had a fascinating path helping build early online banking systems. You founded your own SaaS companies. And those of you that don't know SaaS, software as a service, that's what SaaS is, SaaS, to, helping other software companies rethink the hardest decision, which is pricing. What was it about pricing that really pulled you in?
So we weren't always SaaS. We were on-prem, and then later we kind of launched to the cloud in '08. And believe it or not, I'm a former customer of Software Pricing Partners. So I hired Software Pricing Partners, SPP, to try to figure out that move to the cloud and that subscription and that business model change, and not only what the ramifications might be, but also like how to do it. Um, I have a pretty strong focus on process and understanding the pieces, parts that go together. And I felt at the time as if we kind of figured that out for everything except this world of pricing. And when I got into it, I realized, oh shit, here's a whole nother world of stuff that I don't understand. And I really haven't wrapped into the business model. We were very, very product focused at the time. And I just realized this massive gap. And I had this hunch that it was kind of the missing ingredient for the many disciplines that you have to bring to market in order to have a successful product and have successful sales and operations and supporting systems. And so that's really what drew me in when I exited that in 2013. And I'm getting old. Then I just picked up the phone. I talked to the partner at the time, and he just said, I can't find a partner. I was actually driving down to Charlotte for my next software gig to run a company here in North Carolina. And one thing led to another, and I just kind of did this career shift. But I did it because I was very, very fascinated with the science and the
It's
algorithms
really cool.
and all of that.
So pricing. Okay. So let's have got a product, right? Let's have got a water bottle. I can look at that and go, here's raw cost of goods, here's my cost, and double, triple, pick a number. And it literally is just math. But I think I've read somewhere that you said pricing isn't just math, it's strategy. Would you agree? And if so, can you tell
Yeah.
me more about that?
Well, first, don't drink out of plastic. um, a lot of data on plastic not
There's
being
my
great.
water.
There you
That's my
go.
water
There you
bottle.
go.
All right.
So I'm not particularly fond of B2C examples because that world gives us lots of reference points. And one
Right.
of the really hard problems when we shift from things that we can touch to pricing things that we can't touch, which is the world of software,
Software.
is
Sure.
we don't get a lot of reference points. So some of our clients might do 50 deals a year. They're big deals, but like that's a hard mathematical problem if you're trying to model or bring machine learning and other things. Like you have to really activate the qualitative parts of that. And so in the pricing strategy realm, I would take the word pricing as we shift from B2C and over into the B2B world, and you would expand it into three categories. So the first category that you expand into is this idea of licensing. On what basis are you going to charge for your software? So in that example, you don't have to charge by the water bottle. You could charge by the amount of water that's in the bottle. You could charge by the number of times you take a sip out of the bottle, and all these other ways of charging. And it turns out there's a lot of like you can make up any way that you want to charge. And in fact, we've invented metrics over the years to do that. And this world of licensing defines the quantity of things that you will see on the sales floor. So if I pick something like I'm going to charge you based on the number of times you consume all these tokens, then you could imagine it's going to be really, really hard to estimate token usage for the buyer. And the buyer might perceive a lot of risk, and they might say, I don't really want to come all in. Let's just start with a really tiny pilot. So every choice that you make in this first bucket of licensing has really broad ramifications of everything from how you'll gear, how you'll sell, how you'll get customers comfortable or not, how you'll market your value prop. It just ripples into that world of strategy and touches all aspects of the business. And it also turns out that is the most important decision that you'll make. If you pick a metric that is too constrained, you can expect revenues and valuation to also be very constrained. If you pick something too aggressive, you can expect that you may not get off first base. That chunk is its own science, its own discipline. And part of the reason why we built our software was to model that outcome. Like, hey, before you just decide to go charge on this basis and potentially get a lot of egg on your face, why don't we model it out and just see, like, would that perform financially, and what kind of revenues might we see, and who would pay more and who would pay less, and how do customers get impacted with that decision? The second bucket then is packaging. So packaging in the world of software is less about what you would think of the physical packaging around the good, but more around, am I going to take these sets of capabilities and call it a product, or am I going to call it a product plus an add-on? Am I going to have modules? Like, how am I going to put all this together? And because we're focused on commanding the value of all the intellectual property, we don't really care what form it comes in. It could come in the form of a capability that just happens to be created inside the software. It could come in the form of a service because somebody's brain is really, really good at pattern matching and there's value in there. It could come in the form of an insight. For example, you analyzed 1,000 customer environments and you determined that if you recruit in a certain way, you're more effective, and you built an insight engine off of that, let's say one day. And then how those are put together can either be ridiculously complicated and really hard to buy, or it can be brutally simple and straightforward, which is what we prefer, sort of the elegance and the simplicity of having to make choices around the offer or the package that I'm taking down, so I don't have to have all these elongated sales conversations in order to figure out what I need. And then the final bucket is, which actually turns out to be the mathematical fun part of the exercise, the strategy part, the licensing and the packaging, the mechanical attaching of price points and modeling out net prices and all that stuff. That's where the software really starts to shine. That's where all the simulation technology comes in that we've pioneered. And that attaching of the price point, while important, if you asked me overall, I would describe it as more of a support function, which always gets some eyebrows to raise. So you do have this sort of mix between the qualitative and the quantitative, and you have this mix between the strategic and the tactical that come together to make all of this work.
And for our listeners, just for clarity, so if I understand, what you do is you help software SaaS companies figure this out. That's what your business is.
Yeah,
Helping
it
them
doesn't
figure
have to
out
be
how
SaaS. Yeah, it's software company. So, and technically speaking, we have some service companies too who are trying to launch software or just trying to do things better. But many of our customers have been around for a really long time, so they have really broad portfolios and perpetual things that, aren't in the cloud yet. And you'd be surprised to learn that the majority of that is still around and has been around for a really long time. CAD and engineering software is a great example.
Yeah.
Customers who are born first on the web, customers who are more consumption driven, where there really isn't a subscription, but I'm buying tranches of things like tokens and all this stuff that we're seeing with AI and everything in between. But the common place that we focus is on software and intellectual property.
Love that. In fact, so I coach CEOs, I coach VPs, I coach sales teams. And the most amazing thing, to go back to a comment, elegance and simplicity, how many organizations I think have gotten it wrong. They're so complicated. Their sales teams, and you probably see this, and if you don't, I want to share this with you so you can talk to it, are literally, the sales teams are spending more than 80% of their time internally versus externally, meaning they're dealing with the deal desk, they're dealing with pricing, and it's what are we going to charge, and it's so complicated that they can't just go to a client and say, here's the price, and they've over convoluted. So now they're trying to grow sales, and what they don't understand is their sales reps are literally only spending about 20% of their time with clients. And that is a model for failure in my book. You get that up to 70%, 80% with a client, 20% internally by simplifying. I think that's how many of these companies can grow. So if you're probably having that conversation, I hope your sales team is, but if they're not, I'm telling you, it's a huge pain point. And I think there's huge opportunity to educate these people, because a lot of companies don't do it simply. I don't know. I'm curious what you're finding.
In software, because of the engineering focus, I think I can fairly say I also fell into this trap in a big way. We love accuracy. And accuracy can express itself in ways like, hey, I pulled in a third-party component, and that third-party component charges differently than what I do. For example, an AI add-on charging by tokens, but I'm charging you by users or some other basis. We don't want to get hurt because there's risk there. So we're like, well, it would be safer if I charge you by users, plus I'm going to ask you now how many tokens that you want to consume for this little component back here. And while accurate, we've just injected a second problem into the sales process, which is now some poor soul has to sit down and say, well, how many tokens do you need? And then that person's going to say, well, I don't know. How many tokens do I use? And how are they consumed? And now we're kind of down the rat hole of this conversation that may not have much to do with the core value that we're trying to substantiate, which is why we're on the phone in the first place. And this idea of the antithesis of complexity is, if you asked me what monetization more broadly, licensing, packaging, pricing, the synonym here is everybody just calls it pricing. The antithesis of this complexity, the purpose of monetization is to make the appropriate trade-offs for simplicity without sacrificing revenues. And that's the math and the science and the strategy behind, well, if I don't charge you for this and I'm going to blend it into the main offer, how do I not get hurt? How do I get the right number? How do I attach the right price point in a way that this all makes sense and the conversation track flows smoothly on the sales floor? And I have seen very large companies who still have nothing but PDF contracts. I've seen very large companies, and small too, whose salespeople take 2 weeks to be able to even produce a quote in their CPQ or sales system.
I work with some of them.
Yeah, and it's in the world of the buyer, I'd like to see a couple choices. And if the answer is there's a couple different ways to skin the cat through an offer in your services on your ProServe team, for example, or some form of an implementation or support service, I'm asking you collectively sometimes for dozens and dozens of hours, and at scale, it doesn't scale. And so this is where the organization gets stuck, and we see this growth just, plummet. And it's usually the moment when we're brought in.
There's this really good TED Talk that for listeners, and I share this for listeners, not just for Chris, you probably know this, but so she did research where they gave out samples at a store, like a Costco or something, right? They give it samples. And in one experiment, they had like 3 choices, and then in the other one, there's like 20 or 30. And they thought, well, if we have 20 choices, it'll allow people to get exactly what they want. Well, what happened is sales plummet when you have too many choices, right? It's decision fatigue. And I think in sales organizations, there's too many choices for a client. There's too much hoops to jump through, and keeping it super simple speeds up the sales process. Decision fatigue goes away. And I think of it as the happy menu, or whatever. What's the menu at McDonald's? I don't know. I don't go to McDonald's anymore. But
don't either.
like you got. What do you want? Number 1, or 2, 3, 4, or 5? You pick a number. And what McDonald's found is when you just keep it simple as a package, people buy more. And people don't. They say they want choice, but they don't. And I think what you bring to the table is a beautiful thing, and there's a huge need for it. So I hope the business continues to just, really go.
It's a crazy time. Yeah, of the older, when I say older, not necessarily dated, but the technology that's been around for decades is sort of in the panic state, right? Because their models, their strategy was always user-based, and that derived from a long history of things back when we didn't even have a network. We were charging by the computer and then later by the user. They're panicking because customers are using AI and they're seeing costs climb on a per user basis, which just means their profitability kind of sinks. Customers that are relatively new are all jumping in and offering new AI capabilities. And then on top of that, we have scenarios where depending on the nature of the technology and how this is the ones that have a hybrid for, I've got some old tech plus I've got the new stuff, and how that commingles and how that's priced because each component is used differently is also of high concern. But I think the fundamental shift, which is really interesting to me, is for the longest time, we have talked about pricing as a process. We call it continuous monetization. This is a very unique category because the product always changes. You're never going to buy a car and it accidentally becomes a plane. Like that can't happen in the consumer space. But here in software, I might give you a capability, which is the equivalent of a plane flight, because you're going to embed it in a workflow and make millions off of that. It's just a game changer capability for you. So if the product's always changing, up until about late 2022, if I was telling you this should be a process, you were kind of looking at me strangely, being like, it's a study. Like, we're going to do a study, we're going to set our prices, and then, the private equity firm's going to sell us in the late part of the holding period, 3, 4, 5 years later, and then like it's somebody else's problem. And we would be like, no, you don't understand. Like, we can help this great growth that you're having because the growth is hiding a lot of these inefficiencies. And they're like, well, I'm kind of growing pretty nicely right now. So, you're telling me I can grow faster, but it's not really resonating. After the investment kind of dried up and we saw what happened at the tail end of 22 and then into 23, some people call that the SaaS recession, where investors came and said, time for you to show me profitability. The game's kind of changing a little bit. I know we did a round 6 months ago and we're scheduled to do a round here in 2 months, but we're going to go ahead and push that off. You saw the layoffs and the right sizing and everything. This whole industry is now transitioned into, how do I build a profitable product much earlier, which now is pulling pricing in as this discipline that it was meant to be. But to be fair, the firm started in 1982. It took 40 years for that to finally emerge. And I think what you're going to see now is the equivalent of a chief monetization officer or a clear owner of pricing in certain organizations. You're going to see this emerge as a discipline and as a process that we've been pioneering. It's very complicated, but it needs supporting technology and people around it. And you're starting to see that being taken very seriously by software companies. And the issue that they have is, traditionally, if I want to offer you something new, I am lucky to get that ready for next year's sales kickoff. By the time I get the decisions in and how I'm going to package differently and how I'm going to price differently and this new AI component, how I'm going to handle that, I'm lucky to get everything ready for January sales kickoff 2027. In the future, I think if you can't deploy an update to your pricing and packaging like next week, you're in a really bad spot right now. So there's this rush now to get the systems and the processes in place to be able to do that, because the speed and the rate of change just took a big elevation upward.
And you kind of answered this in what you were saying. Is there a mindset difference between those leaders that get pricing right versus those who struggle with this?
In what sense?
The ones that buy into what you're saying.
Well, your engineering. So this is the difference between kind of winging it or engineering your growth. And many, many products I've seen become shelfware, not because they're not great products, but because the accompanying pricing and packaging is just bizarre and overly complicated. So, from case studies galore, one of those is probably pretty well known. It's all over the website. Bamboo HR, 22 million, took pricing seriously as a discipline. And arguably earlier, prior to all this pivot and emergence of AI, doubled down on that. I think they're approaching 400 million. It's been 4 or 5 years. The meteoric growth of getting pricing right is, the ROIs are almost unbelievable. And by the way, there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is, and I remember at my software company, we were doing ERP software for interior and exterior products. And we would hit a company with multiple, so think like a lumber yard with multiple locations. They would have a purchasing department and there'd be 30 people in there, sloughing paperwork back and forth and rekeying stuff and getting codes wrong and ordering wrong things. And our software would take that department down to like one person and a backup, and that purchasing staff would get reallocated over. The ROIs were, I adopted this phraseology where I would say, I'm a big believer, if you cut your ROI in half twice and it's still a good number, you're in a good spot, because I'm like, how do I show a 2,200% ROI? People are going to roll their eyes and say, this is unbelievable. So if you now look at the emergence, remember we talked about environments and how they emerge and organic growth of how things evolve. in the lack of a discipline of pricing, software companies have now gotten themselves with the equivalent of this paperwork phenomenon. So when you come in with the strategy and the tactics and the software to support that, I mean, your ROIs are off the chart because they're not even like level 0.1 on pricing as a discipline. They're coming pretty close from a zero, and then you're kind of leveling them up. So the difference is staggering. It's kind of a common joke here. It's the easiest category to make money in.
Yeah. So who gets it? So here's the question. I don't mean what type of company. What I mean is, in the organization, are we talking CEO? Are we talking CFO? At what level do they finally, as a leader, does someone finally realize this is one of the greatest impact that we can handle, that we can adapt to the bottom line? And your experience, what's that mindset of those people like compared to the ones that don't get it?
Well, I see a lot of CFOs that really get it. However, that doesn't always come with a corresponding CEO that is supportive. And because of the evolution of this being an event or a study rather than an embedded part of the fabric of how you build the company, or a critical skill set that needs to be upskilled inside the team, that's still an emerging phenomenon. You will tend to think of this like, well, I can either do a contract management system, I can implement a new CRM, I might need a new billing system, or I could work on my pricing. And that's really an incorrect frame to think about the problem, but that is the dominant frame. It's not until you realize the process and the discipline and how that layers into the annuity over time and the value that brings back on a compounding basis that you really get it. And I've noticed that CFOs tend to get it very, very quickly. However, we have some headwinds. Sales organizations are still emerging from what I would call the Wild West. And the Wild West is you and I start a software company and I tell you, look, you happen to be in sales, so go make it rain, baby. Just go make it rain. And then we start hitting our stride and then we really start growing. But I never really reallocate the balance between control and flexibility so that you have max flexibility. So now later, if we're ever talking about pricing and I want to, like, for example, control your discounts and make them more uniform because I'm leaking revenue like it's, bloody waters over here. All you have to do is say, we can do that, but I can't guarantee the revenues or what's going to happen to that. And that turns out to be an incredibly scary place for today's CEOs. And so there's this headwind of getting the sales organization to understand that what we're shooting for is not that kind of flexibility as much as shooting for deal velocity. We want to close 5 deals in the time the competitor closes 1 because we've got it all figured out. The packaging's super simple, the talk track's super simple, and all that work has already been done. And that's how you get that market penetration. That's how you become dominant. That's really the critical piece. So I think it's a dance between the CFO and the CEO on the prioritization front as to how much of this story that they're going to buy into. And then as for their mindset, I have found that there's this pattern that happens in the IoT space. So imagine for just a moment, and you'll see where I'm going with this story in a second, that we're selling software to manage, the safe and efficient operation of a plant. So think Duke Energy's nuclear station, which I can almost see from my house, which thank God I'm on ground zero if something happens. But anyway, so the deployment of that software involves instrumenting a lot of things on the plant floor. And it turns out that the more that I instrument, the more expensive it becomes. And there's kind of a built-in incentive for me to maybe just instrument the critical apps. So if we take this example and we apply it to a chemical factory, you're not going to necessarily instrument the chemical factory on day one and put sensors on all the units. But if you have a chemical spill, oh boy, you're going to instrument the crap out of that facility. Like you're going to put sensors on the walls, like you're going to buy extra, like it's a great day for the salesperson. I think that when there is an event where costs are rising, or we're seeing compression on the old pricing strategy, or we're seeing churn, or we're seeing growth slow down. Like these are phenomenons that are kind of like the chemical spill that bring this to the forefront. But it is very rare still for somebody to come in and say, you know what, I'm investing for growth. I know I'm going to have an issue. We need to do pricing now. Like there is this tendency to be like, I'm not sure if now is the right time. And my message is always like, I felt the same way with kids. Like I wasn't sure if it was the right time. And all the way up to the moment when they were born. And I actually think a couple months after, I was like, what the hell did I do? Like you have that thought, like, was it, like, you don't know. You're never going to know if it's the right time. But I can tell you sitting on this side and looking at the upside and the damage of not addressing it, like it's really, if you haven't addressed your pricing, you're pretty late at this stage of the game. If you've always manually crafted and created it on your own and you haven't kind of gone through some discipline and gotten the expertise, like it's really a scary time right now for you.
And I think also it depends on, just like you said, who gets that message. You know, I've worked in software, but I worked in an arena in manufacturing. And so we'd go on the shop floor and we would optimize time to market. We would increase profitability. We would, kill the competitor basically, right, with our solution. And you go on a shop floor and it would be totally over engineered, way over engineered. And the people that are building it, they go, yeah, but it won't break. But if you talk to the money people, you talk to the CEO, you talk to finance, and they're like, how do we increase margin? How do we reduce the cost of goods sold? And it's by getting out waste cost. So you see this in organizations where their driver is, I don't need to make it better. It doesn't break now.
Yeah.
But over here, they're like, yeah, but how do we shave cost? And they're not looking. So I think in software, if I'm understanding your point, even is, or part of your point there is, it's not broken. It's working. We got the pricing. We're growing rapidly. All we do is we put a price on that. They've been buying it. But then eventually things are going to change. And what I see is companies don't make the change until they're really bleeding, until there's the spill, the chemical spill. And that's, I think the key is with like clients I work with, it's teaching sales organizations, how do I help elevate that pain and help them understand this is the impact. But it starts with who we talk to, the people that have that true vested interest in the ROI and shareholder, value, equity. And I think sometimes we're talking to the wrong people. That's what I see.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's in the plant floor example. So I, when I was at Ernst & Young, I was Apex and doing materials management and production planning. And I remember this guy told me, I was so fascinated by this robot that would take things from one side of the factory floor to the other. And his comment was, that's an inefficient design. You don't need a robot like that. Like this needs to move over here. That moves over,
Yeah, we don't need that.
And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. But if we are talking about the robot on the floor, the software product is always changing, right? The robot on the floor, every time you look at it, does the same thing. It's not like it's getting a material update, at least not back then. Maybe today it's getting material updates differently through the cloud. But back then, because the product is always changing, I think it demands a different frame of reference to treat the problem. And that's the piece that it feels like in the desire to juice short-term profitability or revenue, you don't necessarily want to touch the core. You want to take that which you built, which is new, and you want to attach a price to that. And then you want to be able to sell it. And the problem with, and we call that an add-on, right? Or another component. If I have a core product and then I have an add-on to the product, like it's hard for me to charge you for a robot for $1,000 and say, oh, and I have an add-on for 50,000. Like that doesn't really work, right? But like in software, it's possible that, especially in the AI space, the new thing that I'm bringing that I'm now selling as an add-on because I don't want to touch the core because that feels too scary to me. Well, now you're kind of constrained to that which you priced on the core, and the add-on buyers will think is kind of a subset of that. So you end up kind of constraining the value of that innovation that you're bringing forward. So it's a nasty problem when you think in terms of an event. And so in the end, what you will ultimately do is you will deprioritize the pricing in lieu of other projects, and you'll keep trying to do these add-on components from the roadmap. And that phenomenon right there creates SKU sprawl, like more product codes, more things to quote, more complexity, right? Which kind of just pours molasses into that already slowed down sales process we were talking about earlier. And that sort of toilet bowl flush, I mean, I see a lot. It's a pretty standard thing in the software industry.
Absolutely. I want to shift gears just a little bit. Talk about
You want to
you as
talk sci-fi?
CEO. Let's talk sci-fi. So, what is your favorite? And I'm just kidding. Speaking of sci-fi, oh my gosh, I'm just kidding. AI, crazy. Just saw some sci-fi movies that were made with completely AI.
Yeah.
I can't even tell. Can't even tell. Speaking of sci-fi, not books, but movies. But shifting gears, CEO. For people that are not in a CEO role that are listening, right? They're leaders. Maybe there's a VP director. Maybe they're they're early in their career. Can you just tell people what is it like to be running the show or to be a founder of a company, founder, CEO even, versus, I hate to say employee, but an employee where you don't have the same, you're not the same level. How would you explain the difference between maybe when you were at E&Y today or anywhere? How would you describe that?
Boy, that's a great question. So when I was at Ernst & Young, I remember, so this will loosely tie in. I remember there was a year where my billable hours were like off the charts. And I remember making the firm like over $1 million just on my billable rate. And then I got sat down and I got this like legendary bonus. And I think it worked out to be $7,500. And when I got it delivered to me, and it was couched in all of this cake and celebration and just like this legendary button. I remember this is back in the 90s. The whole time I just kept thinking like, man, I'm on the wrong side of this formula. Like I'm on the wrong side of this formula. And so then I went through and I got on the other side of the formula, but I was angel backed with other people's money. And that, if you want to visit my LinkedIn, I have a newsletter where I talk a lot about that journey. That is not all it's cracked up to be. Now, we had one private equity individual acting as an angel, so this is not the same as raising Series C funds, but it was not. It was very miserable. It's like there were times when it's really great, when the market is great and you're killing it, but every business has a challenging year, and it's in that year where things just aren't going to be your friend and it's going to be very stressful. So from that perspective, I couldn't help but to realize how ignorant I was when I was an employee, because I could leave and go play tennis without a care in the world later on that evening. But yet when you're at the helm, you have all those fears and you will have sleepless nights and you are going to always be close to running out of capital. And there's all this other stuff that comes with that if not properly managed, that frankly, I didn't have a lot of coping skills to deal with that quantity of stress that I had to develop very quickly. I mean, I had the coping skills from working obscene amounts of hours at Ernst & Young. Somebody told me early on, oh, it's like working 2 years for every year you're here because you're working on such cool projects. But I was like, no, it's not. It's just because I'm working 2 years worth of hours in 1 year. Like I know how the formula works now. So then I switched and I got into this. I accepted a partnership here, bought the founder out in 2017, 2018, and now it is privately owned. Which means, by the way, as a consultancy, especially in the early years, what you are risking is your house and your other items in order to have things like a line of credit and other things. And then you are navigating through your own crises, many of which aren't created by you. For example, the dot-com crash, for example, the '08 crash, for example, COVID, for example, all these things. Now, over the years, because I'm in my 50s now, you get a perspective about how to navigate through that. And that navigating through those events, knowing how to get through them, knowing how to spend and where to invest in those times to keep things moving is a very, very satisfying part of the process. And then after you get bigger and the revenues start flowing, it's also very, very satisfying. So the biggest difference that I would say is sitting here now, being able to creatively write in the morning and to be able to drive my kids at school and to be able to talk to them if they're having challenges, to be able to come home and to see them is probably one of the largest rewards. And I don't really care if there's any money associated to that. Like the rewards are very starkly different on the sort of the ownership side or at the leadership side than they are on the employee side. That doesn't mean they're not rewarding, but I would just temper for those that are considering it, the risk that goes with it isn't everybody's cup of tea.
I was going to ask you about that because I see that there's more than two, but the ones that are obvious: skill set, the ability to do it, the right decisions, you have the experience, you learn it along the way, and mindset. Tell me a little bit about the mindset piece, because we can go to get your MBA, you can learn, you can work, but man, it's a different breed to be able to do it. It's that mindset is a big key, and I'm curious if you agree and your thought on that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'll tell you another story. When I remember there was a round that we were closing. It happened to be an oversubscribed round, and then the subsequent round was happening during the '08 market crash. And an employee came up to me once and he said, "So you guys are raising capital again?" And I was like, "Yeah, how did you know?" And he said, "Because I can tell, because the amount of food in the cupboards goes like almost down to zero, because, we were buying coffee and food. And then I guess I didn't even know that I was doing this subconsciously, but because I had some fear about not making the round and missing payroll, I was constraining the organization by not spending so much on marketing, not spending so much on advertising, not spending so much on food and the fun stuff." And what I learned over the years was a bit of pacing, a bit of separation, so that you're not, like, your business might be a roller coaster up and down at some point in the process, but being able to be perceived as and the calm rock in the room during those moments is like ultra important. I remember another story where I tanked a whole development team. Why? Because it didn't look like we were going to make a round. We were moving to the cloud. Some people weren't really super crazy and needed to skill set up, and they were getting a little bit fearful. And in that time, this is during the '08 market crash again, we lost, I think we only had like maybe 12 developers at the time. We lost like 7, 8 of them. Just because too much of the ownership mental stress was eking out and the vibes were getting picked up, inside the employee atmosphere. And so you over the years, that what I would call the mental fortitude will come from a slight disconnect from the ebb and flow and a real focus on prioritizing your day. And if you're in sales, what's in the pipeline and how do I move this forward? And I know I can't get the close, but can I get them from step A to step B? And that's a win. And how you interpret and treat yourself to those wins is also very important. So my wife and I have a rule, and the rule is, when we add a new client, we just go grab a dinner or a date night. It's just an excuse to go out, but something that signifies some form of a celebration, because, this happened many, many years ago and we still do it today. And it's easy, I think, to get discouraged or to feel like you are not doing what you should. And I think it's really what I've noticed a lot from the executive teams and other things is there's a certain amount of guilt, I think, that comes with whether or not you treated the team right, or maybe you couldn't bonus them as well that year, and all these other things. And I think if you can celebrate the wins and the successes and kind of treat yourself right, including things like tennis and treating your body right and exercise and prioritizing that, I think it makes a really big difference. I would never go back. I'm like the impossible employee. I shouldn't say that. Maybe one day I'll want to be an employee, but I mean, it's kind of like having kids. If you never have kids, you'll never miss it. Once you have kids, you're like, what the hell was I doing all those years? I mean, what a waste. Like, this is so much fun. Once you have your own business and you start doing well, I mean, you're just never going to go back. Very
Especially once you
rewarding.
taste that success. But that mindset to get through it can be challenged. What would you say? So the tagline on this podcast is, "What's in the way becomes the way." As you look back over your career, what is something that was in the way in the form of your leadership that it became the way? And it's became the way because it was an obstacle and you either had to go around it or you went through it, but that became a turning point in who you are as a person or how you lead or how you think.
Well, these are good questions. Um, Okay, so when Game of Thrones first came out, if you remember, Ned Stark told his son that
This is going to be a spoiler for people who have never watched it.
the sword, can you tell where my mind is? That the sword was to be, if you remember, he was beheading folks, but it was very important for him to be in the room. Meaning like not just the physical weight of the sword, but the weight of the decision was yours to bear, and you should be the one that sees it up front. And so during the 2008 market crash, I was being told, people are very resilient. You just kind of cut them and move on. You're being like a real sissy about this. Like, what's the big deal? And you got to grow a tough skin. And, this is really a deficiency as a CEO. You got to, and it's not that I wasn't laying them off. It was just that it was weighing heavily. And it would be the first real large set of layoffs that we would have to do, because prior to that, we were doing really well. In that moment, I really resisted that philosophy. It didn't fit with me. I felt like I was wearing somebody else's skin. And to make a long story short, eventually I was like, I'm going to execute these en masse and we're going to get it behind us, but we're going to do something else. We had a recruiter. We're going to bring her in. We're going to help these people rewrite their resumes. We're going to give them coaching and guidance on how to get their next job. We're going to leave our doors open so that they can still come into work. We're going to give them, even though it hurt like hell, an extra couple of weeks of transition, because cash was very constrained at that time. And raising capital through the market crash is a very different phenomenon than raising capital when you're killing it. Yeah. And we successfully bridged those people to new positions. And it was kind of in that moment that at the same time I had a sales coach and we had a sales visit, and we were sitting in the room and nobody was talking. And I knew he was very academic and he's very good. But I knew that what he was doing is that old adage of, well, he who speaks next is the weakest. And I then said, look, if now's not the right time, happy to come back later. And of course, at that point, there's like this breath in the room and everybody could breathe again. They're like, Now, eventually that customer came back a year and a half later and we did business with them. But I got berated on the way back that I screwed up that deal and I lost that deal. And this guy had recorded all my sales calls for 5 years. I mean, just tearing through everything you could think of. And it was in that moment that collided with those two moments where I was like, it's time for me to do it my way. And that more empathetic, caring way where I do care about, they're not just resources to me. They're not just widgets. We do a game Friday where, we try to play games together and do other, like I think many times that when we're younger as entrepreneurs, we surround ourselves with older folks that are supposedly wiser, but we forget that their time and how they handled things and their parents and how they were raised were fundamentally different than ours. And I think that this growing up, it's not really growing up, but it's really transitioning away from what I'm being taught to kind of activate my way. Like I show up in my shoes I command the floor in the way that I want to command it. I say the things the way that I want to say them. Kind of adopting it on your own and making it your own is one of the most rewarding yet also pivotal things that ever happened to me.
Was there someone in your life that inspired you to be this way at the core? Because I've interviewed people on this podcast who they frankly don't care about people. They don't care about it being empathetic. They don't see it that way. So was there someone, either a leader or just a person in your life that influenced kind of who you are as a human being the most,
Yeah, it was
or
probably
as a
my mom.
leader?
It was my mom. Yeah, she was probably the greatest storyteller and the real model of empathy. Um, and I can tell you another story where this kind of happened. And so over COVID, we took in somebody who had some healthcare issues, and it was an older person who also had some other challenges. And when those other challenges came out, I was being told, like, exit the building immediately. This is really bad. And everything. I was like, no, 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 no. Here's what we're going to do. And it was that same kind of thing. Like, we're going to help her find a spot. We're going to get her bridged out. We're going to keep her safe also. And rather than execute that over a week, it was executed over a month and a half. And the rewards to that individual were very profound. Um, and I treasure that relationship still when I see it, although it could have been just kind of cut. If you ask me what I think is really missing in many people's worldviews is this empathy piece, um, that there's a different way. There are many different ways to navigate through this, and when we hide behind the comment that it's just business, I mean, my hair on the back of my neck starts to stand, because business is personal. And as soon as we understand that there is not a delineation there, I think you start to build very different kinds of relationships. One of the, and I'll share this, one of the former chief revenue officer of Bamboo is a dear friend of mine. And he and I read our writing pieces together. And so, like, you're never going to get that richness if you don't show up. And I believe most everybody's natural way of being is kind of like this when we drop the facade and other things. And of course, I'm talking about self-actualization and kind of seeing yourself in the mirror and all the things that will happen as you emerge as an adult and into a statesman, if you will, and sort of these transitions that men are supposed to go through, which we could talk a lot about, that we don't really always get and we don't really have a good guide for. But these transitions are fundamentally important for the depth of relationships and outcomes that you will experience, not just in life, but on the business front for your customers. They go hand in hand, and you can exit those experiences with wonderful depth of relationships with other people.
Love that. I love that. In fact, I want to make a comment. I have one more question, but before I do, uh, it's fascinating you share that, because a lot of people don't get that. I did a live, um, I did a live event I think it was last week on LinkedIn, and I talked about how we typically show up differently at work from who we really are.
Yeah.
And I tried to explain that it's like, no,
Yeah.
we're the same people, and we put that facade on, right? The word you use there. Um, and I think you're right. It's that self-actualization and maturing and sometimes learning to be fearless and to be who you truly are, to let that come through and say, look, if I'm a loving, caring, empathetic person at home, my wife, my kids, my neighbors, why can't I take that to work? And people, like you said, kind of go back to your sales coach, well, we don't do that. And there's this mindset, but it's like when you can become who you are, it it just creates that human connection. And then the second thing I love that you just said is you talked about empathy, but you talked about when someone goes, well, it's just business. And you go, but business is personal.
Yeah.
And it's true. I tell this to all my clients. I say, when I work with sales organizations, I said, you're not selling to a company. No, I'm selling to Microsoft. I'm selling to Netflix. No. You're selling to Bob and Mary and Jane, and you're selling to a human being. And those humans are all in different roles, but that's who you're dealing with. And when people get out of that mindset and they realize, look, this is just human behavior. It's just human. And the better organizations like you, run by people like you, when they get that, it I really believe it makes a difference. So you're doing an awesome job, and I love hearing what you said.
Oh, thank you.
So it's really cool. So, all right, last question for you. Those of you who have not heard this podcast before, the basis of it is my. It comes from when I was a kid, and my aunts, uncles, etc., would say, "David, how are you doing? Good. How's school? Good. How's whatever, football? Good." In the back of my mind, I'm too shy and quiet. I'm thinking, why don't they ask me about XYZ? Why don't they ask me? Because they don't know to ask. Or my daughter, I'd ask my daughter, how's this? How's this? And she'd go, Dad, you're too nosy. You ask too many questions. But then in another conversation, my daughter says to me, Dad, you don't know anything about me. And I'm thinking, okay, what question, honey? What question do you wish I would ask you that I didn't? And that's like when I was a kid, like they don't know what question they should ask me. And if I would have told them, hey, I wish you would ask me this question. So the question for you, Chris, as we wrap up, what's a question you wish people would ask you, but they don't know to ask you?
It's such an interesting question. So I have a bit of a litmus test that I use. So my wife is very social, and I go with her to many events, charity events, other things. And there is a part of me that finds that exhausting. And so we talked earlier about introversion and extroversion, but if given the option, that I'm probably not going to go do that. But the litmus test that I use is when I meet somebody new, I ask them like, well, what project are you working on? And I don't ask them where they work or what they do. That's a question I get all the time. And then they ask, well, what is it that you do? And then try explaining pricing strategy to somebody. And then they kind of glaze over like, oh, and then, they go grab a beer and conversation over. But the litmus test that I use is, do I get a question back? And it's amazing to me. 9 times out of 10, I don't. And so I'll ask them about their project. And if it's work, I'll say, well, what about hobbies and other things? And then we get into the interesting conversation. And back to the earlier conversation about who inspired me, my mom, there's this joke in our family where we would connect her with somebody to talk to. But what we would do is we would call a random stranger. And my mom would talk to this person for 45 minutes before she would realize, oh my God, and had the most wonderful conversation where the woman was talking about all this crazy stuff that she was really bothered by. And so what I would say that for starters, what I wish somebody would do that not many do is just ask me a question about me that doesn't have to do with work, which starts with asking a question about me. And so, I actually just don't get that a lot. It's that old adage of, well, enough about me. Let's talk about you. What do you think of me? And it's that kind of,
I love that.
It's that kind of now when they ask me, then I wish that they would ask something other than work. And it would probably be the conversation in the beginning. Like, are you working on anything exciting? And I could talk for hours on anything from tennis to writing, which I'm really passionate about, to, I don't know if they're into chess. We can have that conversation. I mean, there's lots of different things that we can get into, but yesterday, actually, no, it was 2 days ago at tennis, I was sitting down to somebody and we were talking about the basic stuff. And then I just kind of said, how are you doing? And out came, a death in the family and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, this is the layer that just doesn't normally come out when everybody's in the matrix. And I have found a bit like feeling like you're unplugged from the matrix. And it's amazing to me how many people are dying to share this stuff, which is some of the most interesting conversations I've had in my life. And so, yeah, I think it would just be ask me a question about something I'm passionate about that doesn't have to do with pricing.
I know this is kind of off topic a little bit, but why do you think most people don't do that? They don't dig deeper. They don't peel the onion.
Well, there's this great book, and it's called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it describes the 4 archetypes of a successful man. So the king, we'll get to in a second. So the lover is not just the lover of your partner, but the love of music and fine wine and art and all that stuff. And the warrior is the sort of fight and flight kind of thing. The more mature version of that is to know when to engage in a fight and when to kind of hold back. And then the magician is really the entrepreneur. It's the creation of something out of nothing. It's going and writing a book. It's going and creating a piece of art. It's going and creating a business, right? And the king can only come into the playing board when it represents the ego. When the ego, your ego, has kind of been quieted enough where the king can come in and say, you know what, for this scenario, we need to activate a little bit of lover, a little bit of magician energy, and that's how we're going to solve that. And on this next one, we're going to do it a little bit a different way. I think that talk track I just gave is going to be foreign to most men. And I think that the ego is pretty strong, especially in the tech sector. And that doesn't mean they're not wonderful people. It just means there tends to be a focus on the things that don't extend outside of their periphery, which is the empathy piece that we're talking about, which gets you into other people's shoes. And so I think by design, we tend to produce the former folks running around worrying about that which is in the periphery. And I'm not sure we do the best job of teaching this thing that we've been talking about, which is the more thoughtful, caring way of ushering, whether it's your employees or even older investors or anything, kind of through that process. Like, I think these talk tracks just aren't common.
And I also think it comes down to, do you really care? Do you care about the other person more than yourself? Do you care enough, and do you have enough curiosity to learn about them, what's happening in their life, the stranger you sit next to? Um, and I think it's that genuine interest, genuine curiosity in the human, experiment, I'll call it. And I think the people that have genuine interest and curiosity are better at peeling the onion
Yeah.
and learning about other people and digging in. So
Yeah, I think it's
anyway.
it's sort of like we would all intellectually agree that we do this, but when combined with the actions, that's where the rarity, I think, appears. And so the goal is that when you have that empathetic response, I think, is to what's the corresponding action for that to kind of back it up. And I don't want to paint this depressing picture of humanity, but I think in the end, the more that we can put ourselves in the other person's shoes. So clearly, I am involved in sales. I mean, if there's ever a profession where somebody said, how do I learn about myself? Geez, the very first sale I ever made is probably the most embarrassing story I could ever tell, which we'll do on a different podcast. But, these are opportunities to see yourself in the mirror and go, oh shit, like I think I want to be perceived a little differently than that. And so I think there are other professions and things you can get involved in that will enlighten those
It kind of forces
observations.
you to. Yeah, it forces you to. So, all right, as we wrap up here, you've been so gracious to spend the time with me. If someone wants to learn more about your business or you, what is the best way for them to find you or learn more?
Just visit softwarepricing.com.
Easy enough.
There you
And
go.
LinkedIn? Are you on LinkedIn?
I am on LinkedIn. Yeah, you're
I knew
happy
you
to
were.
happy to grab a connection on LinkedIn.
All right, I'll make sure, if you're okay with it, in the show notes, I'll put your website, I'll put your LinkedIn profile, how to find you, so people can do it. Well, Chris, it's been absolute pleasure. I wish we had more time, actually. So thank you so much for being with me and for your insight and your thoughts. And what a wonderful guest. I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a blast.
Folks, this is Inside the Leader's Mind. I'm David Susan. If you've enjoyed this, please share it with others. Let them know. Tell them about it. If you are watching this, if I post this on LinkedIn, I would love your comments for Chris or myself and your thoughts on some of the stuff we talked about. So engage with us. We appreciate it. Um, I'm David Susan. We'll see you next time. Thank you again, folks. Till next time. Ciao.
Take
Bye,
care.
Chris.